In April 1991, the Star Trek The Next Generation episode The Drumhead was aired. In summary, Federation intelligence had discovered an information leak regarding a portion of the Enterprise's warp core reactor. At the same time, a minor explosion in the warp core brought suspicion to people on the crew. Because of the political ramifications involved, Starfleet Security brought out of retirement its best investigator, Admiral Nora Settee, to conduct the inquiry. Before her arrival, Lieutenant Worf not only determined who was responsible, but had found the evidence necessary to convict the person. When confronted, the spy promptly confessed, but insisted that he had nothing to do with the explosion. An examination of the reactor core by Commanders Data and LaForge ultimately determined that there was no sign of sabotage, merely a flaw in the cover that had been missed by the manufacturer. Not satisfied with this answer, Settee expands her investigation and comes upon the medical technician Simon Tassis, whose grandfather, turned out, was Romulan. Using the fact that Tassis had been reluctant to reveal this, she publicly shreds his reputation, causing Picard to openly question her methods. After a conversation with Simons, Picard went to speak with Admiral Settee, asking her to stop, pointing out to her that her accusations were unfounded, that her methods were unethical. She responded by telling of how she had dedicated her entire life to investigations, to inquiries, and stating that she was going to expand what she was doing on the Enterprise to find the conspiracy that she claimed was on board the ship. Picard threatened to go over her head and inform Admiral Henry of Starfleet Security of her conduct. She informed him that she had already been in touch with Admiral Henry, sending him reports, and had even invited him to watch her conduct her inquiries. This would turn out to be a mistake, along with her plan to grill Captain Picard when Admiral Henry first arrived. Captain Picard had much experience with dealing with pressure. It would take a lot more than vague accusations and distorted facts to make him sweat. When Settee let slip that she was getting desperate, bringing up Picard's ordeal at the hands of the Borg as reason to doubt his loyalty, he responded by quoting a phrase from her father, who was so well revered throughout the Federation that his writings were considered required reading at both Starfleet Academy and presumably at the civilian universities as well. His words were, "With the first link the chain is forged, the first speech censured, the first thought forbidden, the first freedom denied, changes all irrevocably." Settee's response was to fly into a rage. Jumping to her feet, she began shouting accusations at Picard. Her own aides were staring at her in mute disbelief. Admiral Henry, who had not spoken a single word during the entire episode, put an end to her ranting and ravings by simply getting up and walking out. Seeing him leave, she sunk down into her chair in stunned silence. Later that day, a somewhat chastened Lieutenant Worf admitted that he had followed her without realizing what she was. Picard replied that while villains who twist their mustaches were easy to spot, those who cloak themselves in good deeds and noble actions are much harder to find. What I think Picard should have said is that the reason why Settee was so convincing was because she herself was convinced. Admiral Henry was there at her invitation, and she would not have wanted the man with the authority to shut her down watching her unless she was utterly convinced that there was indeed a significant number of people on board the Federation flagship conspiring with a hostile government to betray the United Federation of Planets. In her earlier conversation, Settee told about how she had spent all of her life working on investigations. And no home, no family, no close friends. Most of her time spent in shuttles going from one investigation to another. But she wasn't telling about how she had committed her life to the defense of the Federation, but rather how investigations had taken over her life. She had been a fine officer once, utterly committed to the ideals of the Federation, but somewhere along the way she had lost sight of those ideals and had become so obsessed with conspiracies that was all that she could see. This obsession had made her dangerous, but it also made her vulnerable. It impeded her judgment. It meant that with the right kind of poking, she could become emotionally unstable. And Picard, I think, realized this. Realized that he could stop her, especially when she told him that she had invited Admiral Henry from Starfleet Security to come and watch what she was doing. At that point, he knew how to destroy her. He didn't want to do it, but she left him no choice. The outcome of the confrontation between Picard and Satie in front of Admiral Henry was never in doubt. All Picard had to do was stay calm under pressure, something he had a great deal of experience at, until Satie ran out of cards to play, then put forth the quote of her father, warning against exactly what she was doing, at which point she completely lost her composure. I feel far less charitable towards her staff, but they got off easily. A few months of sucking up to the right people, and their careers would be right back on track. A few years after that, their part in all this would be forgotten. Nora Satie, on the other hand, would live on in infamy. Just as her father was held up as an example of the ideals of the Federation, she would be held up as an example of what those ideals needed to be protected against. All of the good she had done, all of the years of selfless dedication to the Federation, would now be little more than a footnote in her history. For all we know, she left the Enterprise believing that the Romulans had infiltrated Starfleet's highest echelons and the Federation was doomed. The closing scene of Drumhead should have been Picard telling Lieutenant Worf that Nora Satie's obsession with conspiracies had distorted her judgment, that the same flaws which so twisted her perception of reality exist within all of us, that the greatest evil will always be done by those who think they are serving a greater good. But that's just my opinion. What do the rest of you think?